Welcome back to another episode of the Substantiate podcast, where every week I discuss a new hypothetical sports matchup with a guest. So before we get into today's episode, which is a really great episode, I want to let you know that if you take a screenshot or a picture of yourself listening to this podcast and post it on Instagram, on your Instagram story or a regular post, just make sure to tag us and it will be reposted on the substantiatepod Instagram account on its story. So make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at substantiatepod. You can check out our website, www.substantiatepod.com. And this episode is probably my favorite episode so far. So I think you'll really enjoy it also. And if you have any friends that you think would really enjoy listening to this episode, make sure to share it with them because we'd love to expand our audience. Without further ado, let's get into this week's episode of the Substantiate podcast. Substantiate, to establish by proof or competent evidence. Today, I am joined by Pat Ivain to talk about quarterback and wide receiver duos playing in a 2v2 basketball tournament. Before we begin, Pat, can you tell the listeners a little about yourself and your background with sports and basketball?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, William. So, again, my name is Pat Ivain. I'm currently a personal trainer, but I used to, a couple of years ago, I coached high school and collegiate basketball as an assistant in college. But in that time, I just spent way too much time kind of overanalyzing matchups, and just you spend a lot of time on the road basically talking trash with other guys like, oh, this guy would definitely win. So when I heard about your show and it's like just hypothetical matchups and stuff, and I listened to the one you did with your cousin the other day about the presidents. Yeah. It's awesome. So this is kind of, it's getting to be fantasy football season. So this has kind of going around in my head. I've been thinking a lot about fantasy football, and then you talked about this. I'm like, what if the best wide receiver and quarterback duos had like a 2-on-2 tournament? So that all this kind of stuff is really right up my alley. It's a combination of nonsense and sports, which I'm a huge fan of. So.
Yep, we're glad to have you on.
Thanks, man.
So today we're talking about some of the best quarterback and wide receiver duos playing a 2v2 basketball tournament. So this is going to be more of a pickup setting, not really refs or fouls. So, no 3-point line, just kind of hard, fun, dirty basketball. So today, Pat helped me prepare by creating a bracket of quarterback wide receiver duos. And so on the left side of the bracket, going from top to bottom, we have Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill of the Kansas City Chiefs versus Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins of the Arizona Cardinals. Then next, we'll move on to Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams of the Green Bay Packers versus Drew Brees and Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. And then continuing on to the right side of the bracket is Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper of the Dallas Cowboys versus Matt Ryan and Julio Jones on the Atlanta Falcons. And last but not least, we have Tom Brady and Mike Evans of the Tampa Bucks versus Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett of the Seahawks. So that was a lot of information and teams right there. So if you're listening to this, check out all of our social media pages at substantiatepod, and I'll have some nice visuals of the brackets. So obviously in this scenario, we can't really predict things like field goal percentage, but we'll do our best to predict the outcomes of these matchups. And find a winner to this tournament. All right, so let's start it off with the first segment with Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill versus Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins.
So with this, I just like Mahomes as an all-around athlete. I think it'll translate a lot. The little bit of research I did for this, I basically just got down heights and if they've ever played basketball before.
Mm-hmm.
Which most people in the Wikipedia at least has high school basketball. Nobody really went on to play college. And because we did wide receivers and not tight ends, a lot of tight ends play. So little backstory for that. But out of this matchup, I think you have the best athlete in Mahomes. And then Tyreek Hill, kind of 5'10". I think everyone matches up kind of nicely. There's not like a huge height disparity in either of these matchups. So first round, I just give that to Mahomes as being kind of a superior athlete. I think Kyler Murray is a little too young. He hasn't won anything yet. He doesn't know, even though I don't know if that directly translates to pick up hoops.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
He's not sure of himself yet.
Yeah, I definitely see what you were going at there. And the whole Mahomes being an athlete thing, he played college baseball. He was a pitcher. And one thing that I noticed here was that Mahomes and Hill, they've been playing together for 4 years already. So they have a connection that can definitely translate to 2v2 basketball. And Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins, they haven't even played together yet. This is their first year. You were talking about fantasy before. If you're playing fantasy this year, that could be a risk that you're taking either of those guys.
Yeah, if Kyler turns out to be a bust, that's going to be tough because DeAndre Hopkins is basically he'll catch whatever you throw to him. But it's one of those that can go either way.
Yeah, but I do have to agree with you on that, having Mahomes and Tyreek Hill moving on to the next round. So now the second matchup of today in the first round is Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams versus Drew Brees and Michael Thomas.
So for this one, I like that you have Rodgers and Brees as kind of just these old guys. And there's another old guy matchup later on potentially. So don't want to harp on it too much, but Davante Adams actually probably could have gone to college. He was a 2-star recruit for basketball. Put up 9 points, about 6 rebounds, 5 assists in high school. So played pretty well. He and Rodgers he's only 6'2", but he's got this kind of big body to him that I think he can move some people around. Probably a nice pick and roll with those two.
Yeah.
Drew Brees, you never want to doubt Drew Brees. But some injury history there. You could probably rough him up once or twice going to the hole, and like we said, it's kind of dirty pickup basketball.
Yeah, he's a bit
really
smaller, 6 foot 209.
Yeah, he's not the biggest guy out there. Michael Thomas is going to probably do pretty well. 6'3", definitely just lob the ball up for him. And Drew Brees is, I know it's just because he's also a shorter white guy, but he reminds me a lot of Steve Nash. And I think it's just a lot of that. I feel like he could do some good passing. I base this on absolutely nothing, but I feel like also be a good pick and roll. This one's more of a toss-up, but I'm going to lean Packers just because Davante Adams kind of already has that basketball pedigree. And Rodgers just big. He's a champion.
Yeah. So Michael Thomas has 2 inches over Adams, but they should play fairly similarly on defense. Adams is 215 pounds and Thomas is 212. Not that much of a difference, but in this case, Adams may, he has a little more muscle with that weight. And so I could see him pushing around Michael Thomas a little bit. And you said that you are going to go with Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams on this one. Again, I'm going to agree with you, but a little less this time than before.
This one is closer for sure.
Yeah, Drew Brees, you never can count on him losing, no matter what, no matter who he's playing with. He always has a chance. But in this case, I still agree that Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams are going to pull through.
So a little more background on how this bracket was actually created. It was completely random. So I think and Tom a little bit on having a pretty tough first round matchup.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I like this matchup because it was two seasoned quarterbacks playing with, again, veteran wide receivers. These were guys that have been in the league for at least 5 years already for the wide receivers, and obviously Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees over a decade. And how do you think that experience would translate to this matchup?
I definitely think having, we talked a little bit about Mahomes and Tyreek Hill having a bit of rapport. I think this goes even farther than that. Both these guys really know one another. Rodgers and Brees both just know how to compete. They've done it at the highest level. And I can't imagine anybody in this entire bracket wanting to lose or being okay with losing. So you're going to get a lot of competition out of them.
Yeah. And they've just been doing this for so long that, we were talking about with Kyler Murray earlier, if he had a terrible season this year and never was good again, it would surprise you. But would only be his second year in the NFL. It wouldn't be crazy if, say, 5 years ago, Aaron Rodgers just didn't play well, because you already know what to expect from them. All right, so let's take a short pause in this conversation, and when we return, we will finish the first round and move on to the semifinals. If you're listening to this podcast right now, then there's a good chance you've listened to other podcasts. And maybe you've even wondered about starting your own podcast. Well, I started my own podcast, and look where I am now. Now, starting a podcast can be a bit overwhelming, but Buzzsprout puts it out straightforward for you, step by step, to create a podcast. I use them to host my podcast, and that means that they send my podcast basically into all the different directories like Apple Podcast and Spotify, etc. And they also created my website. Buzzsprout is an awesome tool that is easy to use to start your own podcast. And you're probably thinking that this all sounds so good, it probably costs a fortune. Well, you're wrong. Plans start at just $12 a month. And after your second paid invoice, if you use my link, which is in the show notes / description of this episode, and on our website, www.substantiatepod.com, if you use that link after your second paid invoice, you will receive a $20 Amazon gift card completely for free. And say you're still wondering, well, maybe I don't even want to make that first payment. Well, don't worry. They have a 90-day free trial to see if you even want to take this podcast for real, or if you just want to experiment and let it go without spending a penny. But seriously, Buzzsprout is the best way to start a podcast, so go check out my link, and after your second paid invoice, they will give you a $20 Amazon gift card. Our next matchup is Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper versus Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. So what are we looking at in this matchup?
So Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper, again, just super athletes. Dak Prescott, I imagine, probably played a little hoops, but was a great baseball player. So eventually what you see with especially NFL players is how good just they are at most sports. A lot of it just raw athleticism translates a lot. And then you hop over to the Falcons, Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. The Falcons are the oldest team in the NFL.
Wow.
So these guys kind of representing the old man basketball. Matt Ryan, 6'4", and Julio Jones, 6'3". Both played some basketball, at least in high school. And Julio Jones was forget what level he did it at, but was I think also a collegiate track athlete, if not definitely a high school one. Had a 6'6" high jump, which is pretty enormous. I like the Falcons with this one, although it's kind of youth versus old age. One thing I noticed a lot after my basketball playing career ended, there would be this group, if you go to like the open gyms, you definitely see this group of older dudes who only have one or two good games in them, but they just know what they're doing much better than the young guys. That, coupled with, I think, a little more actual basketball pedigree and some athleticism from Julio Jones, I'm going to give it to the Falcons, although I think this is also another close one. I think the Cowboys guys really athletic, but I have to say Falcons on this one.
Yeah, so this matchup, I mean, you were talking about athleticism. There really isn't a sport that you need more athleticism than football. Like, even the offensive linemen that people make fun of sometimes, those guys are beasts. Like, they are much more athletic than regular people. So in this one, Dak Prescott is shorter by 2 inches than Matt Ryan, but he weighs close to 20 pounds more. So even though Matt Ryan's a little taller, and Dak Prescott can still push him around. Right. So Matt Ryan, who's older, so he's got a little less in the tank. And Prescott could come in here, even though he's 2 inches shorter, and just throw Matt Ryan around. So what it comes down to, really, in my opinion, is can Matt Ryan get the ball to Julio Jones to score? And then can Amari Cooper get a jumper to fall if he has trouble scoring in the paint? It's those size differences with the receivers and quarterback. It gives this matchup an interesting dynamic where the players have different strengths and weaknesses that they have to play towards. And, when you're going into a playoff matchup in the NBA, or the NFL is slightly different, but in the NBA, you're preparing for the next team. And then after you finish that round, you could be waiting up to a week before you know who you're playing, and then have to go right into it. And so with these players and playing the strengths and weaknesses, I mean, obviously here we don't have it structured in a way where there's time between it, but there's still that evolution, and that could be harder to defend against. And I think that's something that in the first round here may not have as big of an impact. But, Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper, if they make it to the next round, they've got to keep their heads in the game and use that advantage that they would already have and really, really use it. So in this one, I might have to go with Dallas here. Now, I didn't have any way that we would determine a tie. So did you have anything in mind, or else I'll come up with something real quick?
I can be convinced. I was mostly basing this one off just them having a little better rapport together, although Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper are going to be fine playing together. They've been doing it for a while. It's really just kind of, can the Falcons guys even guard the Dallas guys, which I think it's going to be a lot of both teams can kind of score whenever they want. If they figure out how to kind of shut down Matt Ryan getting Julio Jones the ball, so if Dak Prescott can kind of pressure him, Matt Ryan might just give it up. And we never said how high these games are going. Say they're playing to 21. Call it, they're athletes. They can probably go. Matt Ryan's going to start getting tired. Matt Ryan is an older guy.
Yeah.
So this was another close one to me. I think I could be convinced that Dallas could take it. Just based on athleticism, and I don't know what Matt Ryan is doing with Dak Prescott because he's just a little older, not the same lateral quickness.
Right. And in that sense of lateral quickness and being older, even though he's 2 inches taller than Prescott, if Prescott's got the weight and can push him around more easily, then that means that Matt Ryan is going to be taking more jump shots. And in order to shoot a jump shot, you have to get open. And if he's slower, he's going to have a tougher time getting open. And therefore, the chances of him even taking a jump shot go down dramatically. So, sorry to the Falcons, but we're going to have to go with Dallas on this one.
Yeah, and the whole thing about getting your own jump shot, 2-on-2 is a much different animal from your standard 5-on-5 basketball. 5-on-5, you have a team defense that's going to start protecting the rim as somebody drives, leaving other guys open. In that sense, I'd probably give, a slower. I'm going to say Matt Ryan's a good shooter because he's got good hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
Good throwing. So let's say he's a good shooter. He's probably not like that James Harden kind of guy that can just do the step back and hit jumpers to gain his own space. He's probably just going to have to shoot over people. I think Dak might be able to defend him a little better than I was initially giving him credit.
Yeah, and if you think about creating your own space, like think of Damian Lillard, the guy, he scored like more than 50 points a game, like 3 games in a row in the bubble. And he can just hit a jump shot from anywhere. And that's a gift that I don't think Matt Ryan has to that ability. But just that being able to get open, even the little bits. And if you're double teaming Damian Lillard, it might translate to be something more equivalent in terms of getting your own shot. And that's something that I think Matt Ryan just won't be able to do. All right.
So the old guys go down.
Yep. Yep. So we've spent a lot of time on this matchup. So let's move on to our final matchup of the first round. Then we'll move into the semifinals. So we have Tom Brady and Mike Evans versus Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett. So, let's face it, Brady is much older and less mobile than Russell Wilson. In terms of what we were talking about in that last matchup, we're going to have some of that repeating again here.
Yeah. This more than anything, it's going to come down to the wide receiver matchup, I think. And this is probably the best, at least of the first round, the best individual matchup we've had so far, because Mike Evans at 6'5", also played some basketball. He was 18 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, so could score, could really rebound the ball. Tyler Lockett at only 5'10", was a state championship when he was playing, state champion when he was playing in Oklahoma. So, also good. This is really comes down to a pretty enormous height discrepancy between Brady, who's 6'4", and Mike Evans at 6'5", then Russell Wilson, 5'11", Tyler Lockett, 5'10". So it's – whereas I think Matt Ryan's lack of lateral quickness kind of burned him against Dak. Brady, I think if he plays off him a little bit, lets Russell Wilson shoot, that jumper is not going to be as reliable, I think, as Mike Evans just being, 7 inches taller than Tyler Lockett and being able to probably score whenever he wants.
So if we compare this to the last matchup, Dak Prescott was still much heavier than Matt Ryan. Here, Russell Wilson's at 215, Brady 225, doesn't really have the weight. And Tyler Lockett 182 and Mike Evans 231. That's a 50-pound difference. Evans, no referee. Mike Evans could come in here and just pick Tyler Lockett up and throw him across the other end of the court. And
there's going to be a lot of that argument going. Like, he's a house.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned, it's kind of a good thing we went wide receivers and not tight ends, because then, if you get Gronkowski in here, that's probably the same. He's got a couple guys on the Bucs now that are just loads of people. Like, Mike Evans is just enormous and, definitely played some hoops and can score, rebound the ball. Brady also played basketball in high school. I believe Wilson did too, but Wilson went to college for baseball also.
Right. Yeah,
and he was
like
drafted,
in spring training, MLB. He's played some games for the Yankees. I think he played some minor league games for like Colorado and hit a few home runs. Like, he's another guy that's very athletic, multi-sports. But here, unlike the last matchup, I have to give this to Tampa, Tom Brady and Mike Evans, because the height difference, unfortunately, for Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett with a random matchup, it's just too much, in my opinion. Mike Evans, when you have one player in a 2v2 matchup, 50% of your team, that's basically obsolete. It's very, very hard to win a 2v2 matchup. And I can speak from experience.
Yeah, so I'm with you. I also gave this one to the Bucs. It's just they're going to be a hard out, I think, being that big experience. These guys don't have the same rapport. So, Brady's brand new to the Bucs, but Brady's also been doing this for like 45 years, however long he's been in the NFL. So I feel like he can kind of make things work with whatever you put around him.
Yeah,
that will also carry over.
Yeah, I saw a meme, must have been a couple of years ago, on like Brady's 40th birthday or something. And it said, well, Tom Brady cannot be the GOAT because GOAT's average lifespan is like 18 years or something like that. The guy has been around for too long. Like we were talking about with the Packers and the Saints, Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees. Tom Brady, he's also just got this charisma to him where he can pull through. Think about when they were playing the Falcons in the Super Bowl a few years ago. They were down like 28-3, and he brought them back. Now, I don't know off the top of my head how many field goals they had on their comeback, but that was Tom Brady. That was not Stephen Gostkowski, the kicker. That was Tom Brady coming back. Granted, again, the connection with wide receivers and Gronkowski, tight end. This is newer, him and Mike Evans. But while he was in New England, he had plenty of players coming and going. He was there for 20 years or whatever. So I think he can adjust to this.
Yeah, I think so too.
So now we'll move into the semifinals, the second round. We got 4 teams left: the Kansas City Chiefs, the Green Bay Packers, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Tampa Buccaneers. So as I was getting ready for this second round, this semifinal, I realized something interesting that we'll have to see if it plays out like this. But in each matchup, the first team, at least that we had listed, won. So Chiefs-Cardinals, the Chiefs won. Packers-Saints, the Packers won. Cowboys-Falcons, Cowboys won. Buccaneers-Seahawks, the Bucs won. So we'll have to see if that plays out, if it's a curse of being the second team.
We'll see that. I didn't notice that. That's pretty interesting. And again, a couple of these guys get hosed a little bit because, that Wilson-Tyler Lockett group, you could have seen them do some damage if they had a little better matchup.
Yep. I mean, the random matchup, obviously, in regular sports, to get to the playoffs, you got the regular season. The regular season determines seeding. And obviously, if we seeded this beforehand, then, this is just our brains, what we think. So then it would kind of get rid of the whole point of a bracket. And having something like this, where depending on the matchup, you could see, or depending on the rankings, you could have this being an upset here. And that's very much more interesting than us just reading you rankings.
If we actually seeded this out, and of course you'd have the 1 seeds go, because that's what we thought would happen. So exactly. You're 100% right.
Yeah. All right. So this second round, the semifinals, Chiefs, Packers, we got Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill versus the Packers, Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams. So what are we looking at in this matchup?
So I think this is going to be a struggle for Rodgers. First round, he kind of gets easy with having to guard Brees. Brees is also 100 years old like he is. Now he's got to guard probably the best athlete at quarterback in the league.
Yeah.
That's going to be a tough deal for him. Then the Hill Davante Adams matchup, I'd probably hand that to Davante Adams. Again, was a 2-star prospect going into college, ended up playing football, obviously. But I'd probably give him the nod. It really comes down to that Mahomes and Rodgers matchup. And you're going to want to see how they play it because Rodgers is he's shorter, but he's probably a little bigger than Mahomes. I don't have his weight pulled up in front of me.
Yeah.
But so you almost want to see if he could punish him in there, but I think he's just going to get out athleticismed by Patrick Mahomes the entire time.
Yeah.
So I'm inclined to give the nod to the Chiefs on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. So my thinking is the biggest differences between these two teams, Mahomes and Hill versus Rodgers and Adams, right? Mahomes 6'3", 230. Aaron Rodgers 6'2", 225. Tyreek Hill 5'10", 185. And Davante Adams 6'1", 215. So that's where we're going to look at. Davante Adams has a 20-pound advantage, a 3-inch advantage. We can determine that Patrick Mahomes is going to be better in this matchup than Aaron Rodgers. So then it comes down to, well, how good is Aaron Rodgers going to be at passing the ball to Davante Adams, where he has an advantage on Tyreek Hill? So this is like we were talking about earlier with playing to the strengths and weaknesses. And if Aaron Rodgers can do that, then I think Green Bay wins. But then I'm thinking, okay, so Aaron Rodgers, how does he pass the ball to Davante Adams? Well, he's got to get by Patrick Mahomes. And Mahomes is just pure athleticism, right? In fantasy football, you want to draft a quarterback that also gets a ton of rushing yards. And, right, so Mahomes has got it all. Like, in the NFL, we're starting to see more of a blend between the quarterback and running back. And we're seeing that with Lamar Jackson also. And so just that extra athleticism, even if Aaron Rodgers is able to get that pass off most of the time, I agree. I think Mahomes and Hill, mostly their defense, can keep them on top in this matchup.
Yeah, I think Tyreek Hill is going to do serviceable enough defense on Davante Adams to, make it passable. Whereas I don't know how Rodgers is going to guard Mahomes. And I think he's probably going to score kind of whenever he wants. You can also see in the way Mahomes passes, whereas Tyreek Hill doesn't have this advantage. Maybe he can free himself open. You watch Mahomes play, he does those the little shovel passes where he's just kind of sitting out. He finds a way to get people the ball, and I think that's going to help in this matchup and going forward, because if he does continue to go forward, Tyreek Hill is going to have some issues against whoever he has to guard next. So I'll nod this to the Chiefs.
Yeah. All right. So we've got our last matchup of the semifinals. Now, this is who the Chiefs are going to be playing in the finals. This is a very important matchup right here. And so we've got the Cowboys, led by Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper, versus the Bucs, Tom Brady and Mike Evans. So you saw in that last matchup with Tom Brady and Mike Evans how they just had that size advantage that we just had to give it to them. No matter how good Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett are, we just had to give it to them. That's something that we really don't see here. So, Dak Prescott, similar to the last matchup, he's got 13 pounds on Brady. Brady's got 2 inches, but he's older, so that weight difference really does matter more if he's got less in the tank also. But then we come back to Mike Evans, who's 6'5", 231. So take that advantage he had on Tyler Lockett. Basically, you just cut that advantage in half. 6'5", 6'1", 231, 210. And so here, the pluses and minuses, this is another really good matchup, another really even matchup. So what are your thoughts?
So I think the Cowboys, after their first game, they're like, okay, we're going to watch this next round, see who they have to play. They see Mike Evans just abusing Tyler Lockett. So like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're doubling Mike Evans in the post. You have to at this point. Amari Cooper's a little bigger, but Evans still's got 20 pounds on him, still's got 4 inches on him. He's probably still going to kind of be able to score at will. That brings open Tom Brady, who probably has the most confidence of any person in the world.
Yep.
Married to a supermodel. Advertises Uggs shoes. You have to be very cool with yourself and confident to be advertising that you rock Uggs as a man.
And we're both Giants fans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we hate Tom Brady.
Yes.
But you gotta respect this guy.
Yeah. I'm also from New York originally, so I saw him go down a couple times, and totally fine with what happened. Also, he's not there anymore, so he's less annoying to me.
Yeah, I agree.
So many of my friends were Pats fans, and I was like, I get it. They're really good, and they have been for 20 years, whatever. But I'm still going to say I do respect the guy.
Yeah.
So if they're doubling Mike Evans, he's going to have some wide open jump shots. And I think he's going to be able to capitalize that in this completely hypothetical scenario that we're laying out.
We were talking about with jump shots before, and especially with Matt Ryan. So the quarterbacks might be better at hitting jumpers than wide receivers. Like you'll see before a game, you've got one quarterback and one wide receiver. They're right next to each other. And then across from them, another quarterback and wide receiver. So those wide receivers, they cannot throw. That arm motion, they're on the receiving end, so they might be able to dump something in there. But the quarterbacks just really have that advantage of using their arms to push something away rather than the wide receivers. And so, again, Tom Brady, it's not Tom Brady that has that huge advantage that you're doubling. It's Mike Evans. So Mike Evans, he's just got to literally pull his weight, literally pull them away and let Tom Brady be open. here you're looking at maybe a more spread out matchup where, Tom Brady can just work his magic. He literally cheated to win a Super Bowl. That's how determined this guy is.
That's also, I wanted to bring that up because Dak Prescott has that little bit of advantage on him. The ball's not going to bounce. He's not going to be able to dribble past Tom Brady because the ball's just going to sink into the ground. So he's not going to be able to have that one-step quickness because it's going to be a travel. The ball's not coming back to him because it's been deflated. But it's perfect there. He can just lob that up to Mike Evans. He can catch, dunk it. It's going to be fine. So whereas I'm not seeing this as a huge blowout like Bucs versus the Seahawks, I'm still leaning Bucs with old man Brady and the enormous Mike Evans.
Yeah. And this matchup gets rid of the curse of going first because I agree the Bucs are taking this matchup. And so they beat the Cowboys. This finals is up in the air. This is anybody's game. Chiefs, Bucs, Patrick Mahomes, and Tyreek Hill versus Tom Brady and Mike Evans after this short break. Are you looking for the perfect gift or party favor? Look no further than Tie-Dye by MS for custom tie-dye clothing and accessories for women, men, and children. You choose the style and colors, and they do the rest. They have lots of different tie-dye techniques to choose from, and they have amazingly low prices for their stunning items. For example, I'm on their website right now, and they sell multicolored socks for just $8, a spider crew neck sweatshirt for $30, a swirl t-shirt $20. They sell masks to use while you're outside for $8. Please visit them on the web at www.tiedyebyms.com and on Instagram at tiedyebyms. All right, we are back for the finals of this bracket. We got the Chiefs. We got Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill versus Tom Brady and Mike Evans. So I didn't think of this until just now, but Pat, your full first name is Patrick. Is there a bias going on here with Patrick Mahomes?
Well, I do always love to see Patrick succeed. I don't think that's happening right now. I think he's just been superior. But, yeah, good catch on that one.
All right, so we got this finals. They've come all this way. They've made it past 2 rounds. The Chiefs have made it past the Cardinals and the Packers, and the Bucs have made it past the Seahawks and the Cowboys. And so, like I mentioned before in the last segment, the Bucs got rid of the curse of being the second team in the matchup. They are in the finals. This is anybody's game.
So with this one, we go back to Mike Evans just having somebody he can probably feast on in Tyreek Hill. But now we're a couple games in. How are Brady's legs? He's probably getting tired. Now he has to guard arguably one of the better athletes in the NFL with Patrick Mahomes. This one is a little bit closer than I think either of these teams have had because they're going to really have to do some work to stop Mike Evans. How much is that, 7 inches and experience that we're getting out of Mike Evans going to benefit you? Because now Brady and Mahomes much closer in size than really anybody Brady's had to deal with. And Mahomes is a much better athlete.
Yeah, so we've seen this a lot already today with the quarterbacks and wide receivers both being mismatches, but besides for the Bucs first round against the Seahawks, it was one in the other, right? So besides that matchup, no team had a superpower basically over the other. So then it comes down to if the overall strategy is just get it to the bigger guy in the paint and let the smaller guy shoot. This is just the way I pictured it in my head. I don't know why, but it's what I pictured. No real reason behind it, but just the quarterbacks being more of a point guard and the wide receivers being more of literally every other position on the court. It's 2v2. But just the quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, they're great leaders. Brady's led the Patriots to like 6 Super Bowls or whatever, or won them 6 Super Bowls. Yeah. Patrick Mahomes, he's won out of 3 years in the league. So, they're both great leaders, and they are very similar matchups here. And Tyreek Hill and Mike Evans has just got that bigger body. And so one other thing that I noticed here is, like you were saying before, Tom Brady, he's older. Patrick Mahomes, very young. We were talking about, in general, throughout this whole podcast, we've been talking about their athleticism. And part of the athleticism really is stamina, right? How long can you stay out there doing what you can? No one can say that Brady does not have stamina, right? We already talked about it in the last round. The guy's been in the league for 20 years practically. So it's just not the same on a day-to-day basis. And Patrick Mahomes here has the advantage, as Mike Evans does on Tyreek Hill. So how are we going to see those strengths and weaknesses play out in this matchup?
So this one is also different in the case that so far, I think, other than also Dak Prescott was probably the better of the two players or had a little more of advantage. But Mahomes is now definitely the better athlete and the most advantageous in every matchup they've had. He's considerably bigger than Tyreek Hill. So we haven't done this because the sizes have been a little closer the entire time. But what if you swapped, made Tyreek Hill guard the much bigger Brady, but now you have Mahomes on Mike Evans, who's a better athlete. I think Tyreek Hill just harasses Tom Brady, and Brady might be able to shoot over him a couple times, but it's going to limit Mike Evans a little bit more and make it a little better of a fight so he doesn't have half a foot on somebody.
Right. So in both of the Bucs matchups against the Cowboys and against the Seahawks, Mike Evans was matching up with Tyler Lockett and Amari Cooper, where he had a substantial advantage. And so that is really what led the Bucs to making it here. I mean, all credit to Tom Brady in the NFL, but we're just not seeing that same kind of leading here.
Carrying the team.
Yep, and carrying the team here into this 2v2 tournament. So if Mike Evans is limited, how well can Tom Brady shoot his jump shot over Tyreek Hill? We're talking about Tom Brady being older and not being able to stay out there for as long. This is a tournament. You go to a basketball tournament, you might be playing 3-4 games in one day, right? Mm-hmm. So this is just a 2v2 tournament, let alone a big tournament like that, right? So Tom Brady, he might have 50 minutes, an hour to rest between games, but I don't think that's enough right here. But one thing I will say is that the Patriots in all of their Super Bowls, especially when they played the Falcons, which I think this credit goes to Bill Belichick, who was not in this matchup or on the Bucs, which is part of the fun of this year in the NFL, but that at halftime, Bill Belichick uses that time and he turns things around. He changes things and makes them better. And Tom Brady, if he's learned anything from Bill Belichick, in those breaks between games, maybe, just maybe, he can figure out a good enough game plan based off of what he's scouted from the other games.
Very true. And how often did we see Mahomes in last year's playoffs take roughly 2.5 to 3 quarters off and then come back in, win a game? The Chiefs almost seemed brain dead from the kickoff. And they were just kind of coasting. It's like, oh, okay, we'll win.
Yeah.
And even the Super Bowl came back and had 3 touchdowns.
Right. Even just throughout that entire playoffs, like when they ran out of fireworks at their stadium because they'd scored too many touchdowns, like just those things. But back to what you were saying with the inconsistency, yet still consistent. So in the short term, say he only has it on for half the game, but over the entire game, it's still enough to boost him. So in this scenario, if Patrick Mahomes is not consistent all the way around, how much of that does that affect it? So you said that, these guys are athletes. They can play up to 21 points, which I agree with. But Patrick Mahomes here, that really, really plays to his advantage because that, Brady, there's no halftime here, buddy. You're not going to be able to do that. But Patrick Mahomes, that does directly benefit him.
Yeah, and I think especially if we do just bigger players guarding bigger players. So we'll have Mahomes in our first cross matchup of the day guarding Mike Evans. And, he's probably going to get, knocked around the first couple times because Evans still quite a bit bigger than him.
Well, one thing that I did notice, although Evans has 2 inches, Mahomes is only 1 pound lighter. So, yes, 230 and 231. So, again, that plays to Mahomes' advantage in this switch.
Yeah, that's definitely going to play a little bit of an impact. But what I was getting at is just maybe, Evans throws down a couple dunks on Mahomes early, and it starts to build this. Nobody in the league has a bigger chip on their shoulder than Tom Brady, but maybe Mahomes getting he's got to play from behind for whatever reason. Maybe the first couple rounds they score, maybe Brady gets a couple buckets in over Tyreek Hill because he's 6 inches taller than Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
And then, okay, now we can play. Now maybe it's, 10-2. It's like, all right, they get the ball back. Now they're going to go on a run. Maybe that'll inspire a little bit. But in this, I don't know who Tom Brady's guarding. Even, he's definitely not guarding Mahomes. And I don't think he's ever going to keep Tyreek Hill in front of him. And if you have Mahomes kind of limiting Mike Evans a little bit, that's a little bit better matchup than Evans has seen all day. So
yeah, okay. So then the last thing I want to talk about in this matchup is Tom Brady has the sizable advantage here over Tyreek Hill, right? Tyreek Hill's 5'10", 185. Tom Brady's 6'4", 225, right? So he's got like 40 pounds and 6 inches. So it's not actually that big of a difference from Mike Evans. Evans is 1 inch taller than Brady and 6 pounds heavier. Though that little difference does play out, especially just in the mental game. Like Mike Evans just looks bigger and more intimidating than Brady does. But if the question comes down to, can Brady capitalize on Tyreek Hill? And with Brady's old age, that's where I'm going to say no, right? So Tom Brady, and he hit the jump shot to win the game. Can he throw a touchdown pass to win the game? Yes.
Certainly.
Can he hit the jump shot? I don't think so.
I think youth is just going to get the best of him. I think if you've ever watched like a center try to guard Chris Paul, if they get a weird matchup, just you're kind of seeing that height discrepancy. Chris Paul will just put him on. And granted, not saying Tyreek Hill is as good of a ball handler as Chris Paul is, but in this fictional world where a small guy is being guarded by a big guy, they really just can't do anything to keep him in front of him. So I think Tyreek Hill is getting to the basket whenever he wants. I think Mahomes is going to probably struggle against Mike Evans. This will be seen all day too, as far as athletes go. But I think this one actually comes down to, I think Tyreek Hill can probably guard Tom Brady better than Tom Brady could dream of covering Tyreek Hill.
Yep.
So.
Yep. So I think we have a common consensus. I think this matchup is going to the Chiefs, number one on top. They continue their trend, number one in, they were the first matchup we talked about, 1-1-1. You saw that throughout today's episode. Chiefs won together. And Patrick Mahomes, again, the Patrick bias. Never know.
Oh, definitely. I can't deny it anymore. That's what happened. And ironically, these guys were, and the article I pulled all these duos from, your number one fantasy wide receiver quarterback duo too. So I think they have the chemistry. I think they have the athleticism that's going to carry, the youth in this case. And I think, Brady worked as hard as he possibly could. He had some rough matchups guarding Russell Wilson and then Dak Prescott, but now he's got to keep little Tyreek Hill in front of him, and I just don't think he has the gas anymore. So, I mean, the Chiefs now have a Super Bowl championship. They have this very illustrious win, the Substantiate 2-on-2 basketball tournament championship. So, I think they're thrilled with this.
Yeah.
I don't think there are higher accolades than this championship.
Yep. And obviously the Patrick bias, it's just something I said because it's funny. But to show that we showed no bias here, Tom Brady made it to the finals. We're Giants fans, even though he's on the Bucs. You can respect Brady, but only to a certain extent. And so all the way here, I went into this and I had some ideas like who I think is going to win. And just talking it out like this, it really changes your mind. And I've noticed that with some of the other episodes also. And especially here, the Chiefs started it off against the Cardinals. That one, it just came down to experience. Kyler Murray has been in the league for 1 year. Patrick Mahomes was like 3 or 4 years, right? That doesn't sound like a lot in terms of plus minus, 3 years. Mm-hmm. But if you think of it as Patrick Mahomes has played 3 to 4 times as many seasons in the NFL as Kyler Murray, then there's
some pretty high stakes games too.
Yeah.
In the playoffs.
And so I'll continue recapping the Chiefs' win here today. Then they move on to the Packers, right? In this one, it was youth that won them, right? So Aaron Rodgers, a bit older, and Davante Adams. But Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill persevered through Aaron Rodgers. It was only the second round, so he wasn't getting too tired yet. But they made it past. And then finished it off against the Bucs. Tom Brady just falling apart over there at the end. And that is how this matchup ends. So do you have any last thoughts on any of today's matchups, Pat?
Well, like you said, as we talk it out, you definitely get, you change your mind a little bit. And I was pretty high on the old man basketball of Matt Ryan and Julio Jones early on, but when you talk about it, you just kind of lose it.
Yeah.
Also, I had a really tough time with Packers Saints in the first round. I really wanted to give it to the Saints. Never wanted to count Drew Brees out, but I eventually changed my mind to the Packers, as we were talking. And then, I think Mahomes and Hill did it in every way possible. They had, experience on their side in the first round. And then the next round they had youth, and then they just had athleticism.
Yeah.
And, a championship pedigree already to them. So that's a tough one, but they definitely deserved this one, I think.
Yep. So then, right before we sign off for today, do you want to talk about your podcast or anything else?
Oh, sure. So in addition to being a retired basketball coach and personal trainer, I host the Muscle Confusion podcast, which is basically kind of like debunking fitness myths and stuff like that. That's at MuscleConPod on Instagram, and you can just Google it. We do YouTube episodes and basically wherever you download and subscribe to podcasts, it should show up there for you. And man, thank you so much for having me. This was a ton of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yep. Thanks for coming on. Again, thank you so much, Pat, for coming on to this week's episode of the Substantiate podcast. And I want to remind all the listeners to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at substantiatepod. You can check out our website, www.substantiatepod.com. And if you take a picture or screenshot of you listening to this episode and post it on your Instagram story or just a regular Instagram post, tag us and we will repost it on our story. Also, make sure to share this with friends that you think might be interested, because we're always looking to expand our audience. Make sure to follow us or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. And please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. It helps us out a ton. And come back next week for another episode. And lastly, if you want to send us some feedback or a question, then send us an email to substantiatepod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Substantiate. The best way to help support the show is to, number one, tell your friends about Substantiate. That is the number one way to support us. The second way is to leave us a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. Number 3, follow us at substantiatepod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Hello, I'm Anthony.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
And we're hosts of Capes on the Couch, the podcast where comics get counseling.
Superheroes don't always get to go home happy. That's where we come in.
We offer psychiatric and mental health analysis of comic book characters.
So check us out at capesonthecouch.live and across all social media platforms at Capes on the Couch.